Raffaele Bellondi took Marin Vale into his home on a cold, rainy night in Chicago. Close to 1 a.m, beneath the Wacker Drive overpass, when he saw the 27-year-old woman break her last sandwich in half and hand it to an old man she had never met. But it wasn't the kindness that made him step out of the car. It was the way she sat with her back against the wall and her face toward the street, her eyes moving across each passerby at a steady, measured rhythm, as though she were counting something no one else could see. He offered her work at his estate as a housekeeper, her own room, food, wages paid weekly. She asked him exactly 3 questions in return, and all 3 were the questions of someone who had once been trained to ask them. She agreed without asking his name, and without any idea that the cold man who had just given her a roof was the most powerful crime boss in the city. For 3 weeks, she cleaned that great house in silence, while he noticed only a few strange habits in her that he could not explain. She never stood square in front of a lit window, and she always carried the tray in her left hand, keeping her right hand free. Until one night, when she brought coffee into his study and caught a brief flash of light on the rooftop across the street. She didn't have time to think. She dropped the tray, threw herself forward, and pulled him down to the floor. 2 seconds later, the glass behind them exploded. Lying on the floor of his own home, the boss looked at the homeless woman he had picked up less than 3 weeks earlier and understood one thing. She was not what she appeared to be. What he did not yet know was that the past she had buried led straight back to the man he had been mourning for 4 years. If Marin and Raffaele's story reached you tonight, leave a like so I know you're still listening. Share it with someone you think needs to hear it too. And if you'd like more stories like this one, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Marin's hand pressed down between Raffaele's shoulder blades, holding him flat against the carpet, and she didn't let go even when he tried once to push himself up. Stay down. Her voice wasn't loud. It simply carried something no one argued with. She shifted her weight and dragged him another 1.5 feet toward the base of the table, moving him out of the direct line between the shattered window frame and the wall behind them. Glass crunched beneath her knees. She didn't look down. Her eyes measured the distance from the edge of the curtain to the corner of the ceiling, then from that corner to the side door leading into the east hallway, the same door whose handle she had wiped that afternoon and remembered had a looser lock than any of the others in the house. Outside came the sound of feet running over gravel. More than one person. "The side door," she said, her eyes still fixed on the ceiling. "Lock it, right now." Raffaele lay on his side with one cheek pressed against the floor of his own house, and in those 3 seconds he did something he hadn't done in 4 years. He obeyed someone else's order. He reached toward the edge of the table, felt around for the house phone that had fallen with the coffee tray, and pressed the direct line to the guard post. "East door. Lock it." He said exactly 3 words. 4 seconds later, the alarm for that section went off, a high, steady shriek tearing through the silence that had settled after the glass shattered. Someone had touched the door from outside. The hallway lights came on in strips. The footsteps changed direction, moving away from the side of the house and fading toward the western fence. Otis Frayne kicked open the study door and came in with 3 of his men, their guns held low, and he froze for half a second at the sight of the most powerful man in Chicago lying on the floor, while the maid, who had been in the house only 3 weeks, was kneeling over him, one hand holding his shoulder down and the other pointing toward the side door. "He's fine," Marin said before anyone could ask. "Don't turn on any more lights in this room, and don't let anyone cross in front of that window." Otis opened his mouth as though he meant to say something, then stopped. He gave a signal, and 2 of his men immediately moved apart along the walls, circling the edges of the room instead of crossing through the center. Only then did Marin take her hand away. She backed up, sat against the leg of the table, and finally looked down at her hands. They were stained with coffee. They weren't shaking. Raffaele sat up slowly, leaning his back against the edge of the wooden table, and he didn't look toward the broken window, nor at the dark mark on the wall where his father's old calligraphy had been torn through one corner. He looked at her. There were 7 people in the room. 6 of them were paid to react faster than anyone else in this city, and the only person who had managed to do anything before the glass broke was the girl he'd taken in from beneath a bridge, the same girl who had been carrying coffee 10 minutes earlier. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Marin looked down at her knee, where the fabric of her pants had darkened with blood and a few tiny shards of glass clung to it, then shook her head. "Nothing serious." Nunzia Cavallo appeared in the doorway with a robe thrown hastily around her, her face drained white, and she stood there looking around the room, as though counting to make sure no one was missing. Otis turned to her. Take everyone to the basement. No one leaves the house tonight." Then he turned back, and for the first time in 3 weeks, he spoke directly to Marin instead of talking over her. "What did you see?" Marin didn't answer immediately. She stood, moved along the wall toward the window frame, stopped about 3 feet away, tilted her head, and looked upward through the narrow opening between the 2 curtains toward the roof of the building across the street. The streetlights cast a dull yellow glow across it. There was nothing there anymore. "He's gone," she said. "But he wasn't in a hurry." Otis frowned. "How do you know?" "Because if he'd been in a hurry, there would have been a second shot." She pulled the curtain closed very slowly with one hand, keeping herself off to the side. "He saw the boss go down. He had time. He didn't fire again." The entire room went silent. Raffaele rose from the edge of the table, brushed off his sleeves, and looked at her for a long time before asking the next question, the one he would later remember having asked at that exact moment. "Then what did he want?" Marin turned around. The hallway light fell across one side of her face. "He wanted to see which direction all of you would run." They took her down to the small sitting room on the ground floor, the only room in the house without windows facing the street. Otis Frayne pulled a chair into the middle of the room and pointed to it. Marin didn't sit. She walked around the chair, pulled another one away from the wall, angled it so that her back faced the corner of the room and her eyes faced the door, then sat down. Otis watched her do it without saying anything, but he filed it away in his mind. "Tell me again from the beginning," he said. "No," Marin replied. "You've already heard that part. You were standing in the room, and repeating it won't add anything. I'll tell you 3 things you don't know." Otis folded his arms. Behind him, Raffaele stood leaning against the doorframe, his hands in his pockets, silent. "First," Marin said, "that man didn't come here to kill the boss tonight. If the target had been his life, there would have been a second shot while we were still on the floor. And during that window, no one in this house could have stopped him. He chose not to fire again. Choosing not to shoot is a decision, not a failure." Otis didn't move. "Second, that shot was a measurement. He wanted to know how long it took your alarm to sound, which way your men would run, how many seconds passed before the hallway lights came on, and which direction all of you would converge on when something happened. Tonight, you answered every one of those questions for him, free of charge. Next time, he won't need to measure anything." The guard standing by the door glanced toward Otis. Otis never took his eyes off Marin. "And third," she said, more slowly than before, "the man on the roof isn't the real threat. He's only the one who pulled the trigger. He knew where the boss would be standing, which direction his back would be facing, and exactly when there would be only one person left in the study. No one watching from the street could know those things. Someone told him, 'That person isn't on the roof. That person is much closer.'" The room remained silent for a very long time. Otis turned his head toward Raffaele, and when he spoke, his voice had changed from the one he'd used when he first entered. "Ordinary people don't say things like that, sir." Raffaele pushed away from the doorframe. He took 3 steps into the middle of the room, stopped in front of Marin, and neither lowered nor raised his voice. "Who are you?" Marin looked up. Both hands rested on her thighs, her fingers neither intertwined nor clenched. "I'm the person who just pulled you to the floor." "That's not an answer." "That's the only answer that's useful to you tonight," she said. "The others can wait until morning." Otis stepped half a pace forward, but Raffaele raised one hand, and he stopped. Raffaele looked at her for another moment, then turned to Otis. "Send someone to check the roof across the street before dawn. Don't call the police. Call Sardi and tell him to be here tomorrow morning." Otis nodded and stepped outside to make the call. At the doorway, he gave 2 of his men instructions in the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed without explanation, saying that no car was to leave the grounds that night, that the name of this house was not to appear in any news report, and that if anyone called to ask what had happened, he wanted to know who they were before they finished their second sentence. Marin sat quietly in the corner and listened to all of it. She listened to the way the man spoke about the police as though he were talking about the weather, an inconvenience outside the walls that people had the right to choose not to invite into their home. She listened to the way no one in the house, not even the 64-year-old housekeeper trembling in the hallway, asked the most obvious question anyone would ask after a window had exploded from a bullet, which was why someone wanted to shoot the owner of the house. No one asked, because every one of them already knew the answer. For 3 weeks, she had been cleaning floors in this house, and telling herself that rich men had bodyguards all the time. Sitting in that windowless room, she understood that she'd been telling herself something that wasn't true. This wasn't the home of a businessman. She still didn't know whose home it really was. But when Raffaele turned back and told her he wanted to see her in the study the next morning, she answered, "Yes, sir," in the voice of someone who had already begun counting every door in the house again. At 7 o'clock that morning, Otis Frayne placed a single sheet of paper on the study desk and said it had taken him all night to get even that much. There were only 7 lines on the page. Marin Ashgrove, Otis read, 27 years old. That's the name she gave Mrs. Nunzia when she started working here. Ashgrove is her mother's last name. I managed to get that far. Beyond that, there's nothing. Raffaele stood beside the window frame that had been temporarily covered with a sheet of plywood, holding a cup of cold coffee. What does nothing mean? It means that for the past 3 years, this woman hasn't existed, Otis said. No registered address, no rental agreement, no bank account, no credit cards, not a single reported paycheck, no hospital records, no traffic citations, not even one registration at a shelter anywhere in the city. 3 straight years, a blank space. He tapped one finger against the paper. People don't simply become empty like that, sir. Truly homeless people still leave traces. They go to hospitals, they get tickets, they apply for assistance. Their names end up in church records. This kind of emptiness means someone erased her, or she erased herself. And if she managed that, then she had to know how people erase someone in the first place. Raffaele set the coffee down. What about before those 3 years? Before those 3 years, I need her real name, Otis said. And I think you already know she isn't going to give it to me. Orlando Sardi arrived close to 9 o'clock, wearing a gray coat, walked straight into the study without anyone leading him, and paused for a moment in front of the plywood covering the shattered window. He laid one hand against it very gently, the way someone might place a hand on the shoulder of a child who had just fallen. If your father were still alive, he would have been standing exactly where you were standing last night, he said. How many times did I tell you not to work late in that room? He sat down, listened as Otis went through everything that had happened, and listened carefully, nodding at the right moments, asking exactly the questions a longtime advisor was supposed to ask. Then he let a name fall lightly into the room, like dropping a pebble into still water. Cormac Doyle. Otis looked up. Sardi shrugged. He's lost 2 dock contracts to us in the past 3 months. His people have been asking questions around Cicero since early fall. 1 shot and then nothing. No theft, no demand. That's not how someone kills a man. That's how someone sends a letter. He looked at Raffaele. I'm not saying it was definitely him. I'm saying that if you look somewhere else, you're wasting your time. Raffaele didn't answer that. He walked to the desk, pulled open the bottom drawer, and took out a small key Otis had never seen him use before. I want every file on my father's death reopened, he said. Ledgers, contracts, the list of everyone who was present that day, the police reports, and every expense from the family fund, for the 6 months before and the 6 months after he died. Everything. I've left that place untouched for 4 years. I'm not leaving it untouched for a 5th. There were 3 men in the room. Otis nodded and wrote it down. Sardi remained seated with both hands resting on his knees, and he took exactly 1 beat longer than usual before speaking. Now? You were nearly shot last night, Sardi said. You should be worrying about this week, not 4 years ago. Maybe they're the same thing, Raffaele replied. Sarti looked at him for a moment, then smiled, the tired smile of an uncle far too familiar with his nephew's stubbornness, and shifted to another subject as naturally as breathing. What about that maid? He asked. You're planning to keep her in the house? She saved my life. Or she knew that shot was coming and put on a very convincing performance for you, Sardi said, his voice still mild. I'm not saying she's one of Doyle's people. I'm saying you don't know who she is. Otis doesn't know who she is. And you've just allowed a woman with no past to sleep under your roof while someone is aiming at your windows. Give her some money, thank her, and send her away. That's the smartest thing you can do this week. Raffaele looked toward the plywood covering the window. Thank you, Uncle, he said, but she's staying. Saturday afternoon, Nunzia handed Marin her weekly pay envelope and told her that the boss had ordered that no one was to leave the grounds alone. But if she truly had somewhere she needed to go, she could, as long as she was back before 8 o'clock that evening. Marin thanked her, slipped the envelope into the inside pocket of her coat, and went out to catch the first bus. She changed routes at 63rd Street, rode another 20 minutes, then got off on the south side at an intersection with a laundromat that stayed open all night. At the reception desk, she signed the visitor's log under the name Ashgrove and wrote a single word in the space asking her relationship to the resident. Friend. Delphine Vale was sitting by the window with both hands resting in her lap, and she looked up when she heard footsteps approaching. You came. Yes, I came, Marin answered. How are you feeling today? I'm well, but you're a little late. She looked out the window. My husband will be home soon. He comes home at 6 o'clock. Always 6. Did you remind him to buy more bread? I told him, but I'm sure he'll forget again. I'll remind him. Marin pulled a chair closer, took the comb from the bedside drawer, and began brushing the woman's hair. She brushed from the crown downward, one slow stroke at a time, her left hand supporting the back of Delphine's neck so she wouldn't have to strain it. Mrs. Delphine was quiet for a while, then she spoke again. You're very good at that. My daughter used to brush my hair too. But she's busy. She's a police officer, you know. Marin's hand didn't pause. Yes, ma'am. She's a police officer, Delphine repeated, and warmth entered her voice. The day she put on her first uniform, my husband couldn't stop taking pictures. She stood so straight. Do you have children? No, ma'am. You will understand someday, she said. You give birth to a child and think you'll spend your whole life taking care of them. Then one day, you discover they've turned around and started taking care of you. Marin finished the right side and moved to the left. She tucked a strand of silver hair behind the woman's ear and kept her voice exactly as it had been when she first entered the room. Even. Pleasant. The voice of someone paid to speak kindly to elderly people. Do you miss your daughter? Of course I do, Delphine said. But never mind. She's busy. Let her do her work. Just remember to tell my husband to buy the bread. I will. Marin brushed her hair for another 10 minutes, tied it back with a cloth ribbon, then returned the comb to exactly where she'd found it. The facility manager had been standing in the doorway for some time, and she gave Marin a small nod to signal that she should step outside. They stood at the far end of the corridor beside a broken soda machine. Miss Ashgrove, I've done everything I can, the manager said. 3 months. July, August, September. I've signed 2 extensions already, and this time they won't allow me to sign another. I have this month's money. Marin took out the envelope. I can pay part of it. The manager looked at the envelope and shook her head. A partial payment won't solve anything. If all 3 months aren't paid in full by the end of the month, we'll have to transfer her. There's a place on the west side of the city that accepts cases like hers. But listen to me. That place isn't like this one. There won't be anyone there to brush her hair. Marin held the envelope in her hand and didn't put it back into her pocket. How many days? Until the end of the month, the manager said. I'm sorry. The bus ride back was nearly empty. Marin sat near the rear, her back against the wall and her face turned toward the entrance, and counted everything again in her head. 1 week's pay in that house was equal to a month's wages anywhere else she could find work right now. 3 weeks remained until the end of the month. 3 more weeks. And if she stayed in that house, she could pay all 3 months in full and still have a little left over. If she left, she wouldn't be able to pay anything at all. She thought about the sheet of plywood covering the shattered window. She thought about the way that man had said not to call the police, and the way no one in the house had asked why someone wanted to shoot him. She knew perfectly well what kind of house she was living in, what kind of house it truly was. And she knew that a sensible person would have gotten off at the next stop. The bus stopped there. The doors opened, then closed again. Marin remained in her seat, one hand gripping the envelope inside her coat pocket, and she stayed there all the way to the final stop. On Monday morning, driven by her police protective instincts after the shooting, Marin turned into the corner grocery store and bought the cheapest hardbound notebook they had, along with a ballpoint pen. As she stood there paying, she told herself she was only going to write down a few things so she wouldn't forget them, and the moment she said it inside her own head, she knew she was lying to herself. On the first page, she didn't write her name or the date. She simply drew 3 columns the way she'd been taught 7 years earlier. What, when, where. By Wednesday evening, the first page was full. The flower delivery truck entered through the rear gate at 10:15 Tuesday morning, even though Nunzia had told her that the flowers in this house were replaced every Friday morning, every week without exception, and had been for 20 years. On Wednesday, the truck came again, this time at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The driver never got out. Only the man in the passenger seat carried down the flower box, and that box was lighter than a box of flowers should have been, because he carried it with one hand, and there wasn't the slightest strain in his wrist. The camera at the end of the second-floor hallway had been angled about the width of a hand, farther to the right than it had been the week before, enough to leave the far end of the corridor, where the service stairs descended toward the garage, outside its field of view. Maren knew it had shifted, because every morning she wiped the wooden ledge directly beneath it. And the week before, the shadow of the camera body had fallen across the left edge of the ledge, while this week it didn't. She wrote all 3 things in the notebook and sat looking at them for a long time. The man who had trained her in the protective detail had been a man of few words, and he had only one sentence he repeated so often that everyone in the course could recite it from memory. Once is chance, twice is coincidence, 3 times is truth, and the most dangerous thing in this work isn't seeing the 3rd time, but convincing yourself that the 3rd time is only another accident. Thursday morning, she knocked on the security room door. Otis Frayne was reviewing surveillance footage. He turned his chair around and listened to her from beginning to end without interrupting once. "I know about the flower truck," he said when she finished. "We have 3 suppliers. The contract changed this week, so they were making up deliveries. As for the camera, someone from the security company came in Friday for maintenance. They took it down to clean it and put it back up. Being a little off-center is normal." He spoke in a very polite voice, the voice of a man whose professional duty required him not to look down on someone beneath him, though in truth he had already dismissed her before she ever opened her mouth. "It's good that you notice things, but you take care of your work. There are already 11 people being paid to take care of this house." Maren nodded, thanked him, and walked out. She didn't argue a single word. 4 years earlier, she had argued. She had stood in a different room and said over and over again what she had seen. And she'd learned that when a person's words carried no weight, repeating them only made them lighter. So this time, she chose another way. Bringing coffee to the boss in the study was her job, every evening without exception. At 9:30, up from the kitchen by the main staircase, through the second-floor hallway, then a knock at the door. Thursday night, she didn't go at 9:30. She made the coffee at 8:10 and went up by the service stairs near the garage, a route that took 2 minutes longer and was darker, and she told no one, not even Nunzia. Friday night, she changed again, at 9:45, using the main staircase but circling through the reading room. Saturday night, she returned to the usual time and the usual route. 3 nights, 3 different patterns, with no one warned in advance. On Sunday, as she carried the tray through the second-floor hallway, the guard stationed at the far end glanced at the clock, then at her, and casually let slip the kind of ordinary remark people make just to fill silence. "On time tonight. Heard you've been coming late and taking the long way around the last few nights." Maren stopped for half a step. "Who told you that?" The guard shrugged. "Orders came down from upstairs. Someone asked me which way you'd been taking these past few nights. I told them I wasn't sure because some nights you didn't pass my post." She thanked him and continued, carrying the tray in her left hand while keeping her right hand free, then knocked on the study door, exactly as she did every evening. But on the way back down, she didn't return to her room immediately. She stopped at the landing, opened the notebook, and wrote a line shorter than any of the others. No one outside this house knew she had changed both her time and her route for 3 nights in a row, which meant the person who wanted to know those things wasn't outside. That person was inside this house, sleeping beneath the same roof she was, and there was every chance that tomorrow morning they would greet her in the hallway. Monday morning, Orlando Sarti arrived earlier than usual, and he didn't go straight upstairs to the study. He turned into the kitchen instead, pulled out a chair at the end of the wooden table, and asked Nunzia to pour him a cup of tea, as though he had been sitting there every morning for the past 20 years. Maren was drying a stack of plates at the sink. "You're the girl who pulled the boy down to the floor, aren't you?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Sit down." He pointed to the chair across from him. "I'm not used to talking to someone's back." Maren dried her hands and sat down, slightly angled to one side, her back not touching the chair. Sarti looked at her with the kind eyes of an uncle, and his voice was warm enough that even Nunzia, standing by the stove, turned to look. "The boy's father was my friend for 30 years, he said. "I held him when he was too young to walk, so you understand, when someone saves his life, that isn't a small thing to me." "Your name is Ashgrove?" "Yes, sir. Where are you from?" I was born here, sir. Chicago. Which part? The west side, near Ashland Avenue. Ashland. He nodded thoughtfully. I used to do business out there. Do you have any family left? No, sir. There's no one left. No one. He repeated the words. Your parents are both gone? Marin looked at him. Yes. Where did you go to school? I finished high school and went to work. Where? Different places, sir. Restaurants, warehouses. Where were you working before you ended up on the street? He asked the question in exactly the same tone he'd used for the previous 4. No quicker, no heavier. A warehouse too, sir, Marin answered. Excuse me. I still have to clean the second floor. Go ahead, Sardi said, and he smiled. I'm only curious. Old men ask too many questions. Don't take it personally. She stood, picked up the dishcloth, and as she passed him, she heard him add one more sentence. Very softly, almost as though he were speaking to his tea. You stand very straight. Not many people your age stand like that. Half an hour later, in the study, he placed a thin folder on Raffaele's desk. I've had people asking questions on the west side all week, he said. Doyle lost 2 dock contracts. Doyle borrowed money from 2 small banks in July to make payroll. Doyle has a nephew by marriage who served in an Army sniper unit, left the service 3 years ago, and no one seems to know where he is now. I'm not saying I have proof. I'm saying everything points in one direction, and when everything points one way, a wise man doesn't walk the other. Raffaele opened the folder and read slowly without speaking. There's one more thing. Sardi sat down. You've kept that girl in the house for nearly 3 weeks now. 3 weeks. 3 weeks. He nodded. I spoke to her this morning. Do you know what I learned? She answers very quickly. Quick and clean. Every answer complete. Every answer short. Not one unnecessary word. When people are questioned about their lives, they wander. They tell stories. They remember something wrong and correct themselves. She doesn't. She answers like someone who prepared those answers a long time ago. Maybe she doesn't want to talk about herself. Maybe, Sardi said. Or maybe someone taught her how to answer. Think about it, Raffaele. A young woman with no past suddenly appears beneath a bridge on the exact night you happen to pass through there, somehow ends up being brought into your house, and then 3 weeks later a bullet comes through your window, and she's the only person in the house who knows it's coming before anyone else does. Tell that story to anyone on the council and see if a single one of them calls it luck. Raffaele closed the folder. What do you want me to do? Give her some money and send her away, Sardi said. No need to make a spectacle of it. No need to ask anything else. Just get her out of this house before you have a reason to regret keeping her here. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm only asking you not to leave the door open for someone when you don't know who they are. Raffaele stood, walked to the plywood covering the shattered window frame, and remained there for a moment with his back turned. There were 7 people in this room that night, Uncle, he said. 6 of them I know by name, by the year they started working for me, by every dollar they're paid. The only person I knew nothing about was the only one who thought to lock the side door. He turned around. You're telling me not to leave the door open for someone I don't know. The problem is, that night she was the one who closed it for me. Tuesday afternoon, Nunzia handed Marin a ring of keys and told her to go upstairs and clean the office at the far end of the 2nd floor, a room that stayed locked all year and was opened only twice a year to be dusted. She told her not to move anything, not to open any drawers, and when she finished, to lock the door and bring the keys straight back. The room smelled of old paper and furniture wax. Marin wiped the desk first, then the bookshelves, then the low cabinet against the left wall, where 3 framed photographs lay face down beneath a cloth cover. She lifted the cloth away. She raised the first frame, wiped the glass with a soft cloth, and set it back down. She picked up the second frame. Her hand stopped halfway. In the photograph was a silver-haired man wearing a dark coat, standing on the steps of a church with one hand in his pocket, his head tilted slightly to the left, as though someone just outside the frame had called his name. He had that particular way of tilting his head. Marin knew that tilt. She had seen it from less than 5 feet away, beneath the orange glow of a street lamp, on the sidewalk along Michigan Avenue one November evening 4 years earlier, when she had dropped to her knees and slipped one hand beneath the back of his neck to keep his head from striking the pavement. She had held him that way until he stopped breathing. She stood perfectly still for a very long time. The cleaning cloth was still in her right hand, but she could no longer feel it. Somewhere in the hallway, someone walked past. A door closed downstairs. A car entered through the gate. She heard every one of those sounds, yet her mind couldn't process any of them. In the lower right corner of the photograph was a small handwritten line in faded blue ink. Cosimo Belandi. Belandi. She read the name twice, then a third time, and each time she did, another piece of the past 4 weeks slid quietly into place. The way everyone called the man who owned the house, the boss, and never by his name. The way Otis had ordered his men that the name of this house was not to appear in any news report. The way no one had asked why someone wanted to shoot him. 4 years earlier, the entire city had printed that surname across the front page for 11 days straight, and beside it, they had printed another surname too. Hers. Marin lowered the photograph very gently, placing it exactly where it had been, then covered it again with the cloth. She finished wiping the cabinet. She finished cleaning the entire room, switched off the light, locked the door, and carried the keys downstairs to Nunzia, who noticed nothing unusual except that Marin had finished faster than she'd expected. When Marin returned to her room, she closed the door and leaned her back against it. Then she pulled the cloth bag from beneath the bed. She packed the way people pack when they've done it too many times before, without hesitation, without picking things up only to put them back down. 2 shirts, her old shoes, a toothbrush, the hardbound notebook. The pay envelopes from this week and the week before she set aside separately, tucked between 2 layers of clothing. She zipped the bag closed, slung it over her shoulder, and took 3 steps toward the door. On the 3rd step, she stopped. She stood there with the bag hanging from her shoulder, and the image in her mind wasn't the man in the photograph, nor the 11 days of front-page headlines. It was a hand resting on a lap beside a window on the south side, and a voice saying, "My husband will be home soon. He comes home at 6 o'clock. Remind him to buy bread for me." 3 weeks remained until the end of the month. 3 weeks of wages in this house would be enough to pay all 3 months of debt. 3 weeks of wages anywhere else wouldn't pay anything. They said the girl is busy. Just let her do her work. Marin slipped the bag from her shoulder. She set it on the floor beside the bed, didn't open it, didn't push it back underneath. She sat on the edge of the bed and remained there in the darkness, with both hands resting on her knees, until the house bell mounted on the wall beside the door rang twice, 2 short chimes. It was the signal calling a servant to the study. She looked at the bell. It rang twice again. Then she stood, smoothed the front of her clothes, and walked out into the hallway. She stopped by the kitchen to pick up the tray, made the coffee, and carried it upstairs in her left hand the way she did every evening. The plywood had been removed, and the newly installed window frame still had its label stuck to the lower corner. Raffaele was sitting at the desk, several thick bundles of files tied with string spread out in front of him, things she had never seen on that desk during the past 4 weeks. "Come in." Closed the door. Marin set the tray on the edge of the desk. "I called you up here for 2 things, he said. "First, starting this week, your pay is doubled. I've already told Nunzia. You don't need to thank me. It isn't a gift." "Yes, sir." "Second." He tapped one finger against the file on top. "I've reopened every document connected to my father's death. I haven't touched them in 4 years. Now I am." Marin picked up the coffee pot. She poured, the dark stream flowing steadily into the bottom of the cup, and she stopped at exactly the same level she reached every evening. Raffaele didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on the file. "He was on his way to testify in court," he said. "He had a city police protection detail, 7 people. He got out of the car, walked 10 steps along the sidewalk, and someone fired down from above. He fell there and never got back up." She set the coffee pot back on the tray. "The report says the protective perimeter was compromised because one officer left her assigned position without authorization, leaving one direction exposed," he said. "A female officer, 23 years old. She'd only been on the protection detail for a few months." Marin held the coffee cup in her left hand. "It's been 4 years," Raffaele said. "I've forgotten almost everything in that report. I couldn't tell you the names of the others if I tried, but I remember her last name. Short one, Vale." She placed the cup on the desk to his right, 3 finger joints from the edge, exactly where she always left it. The saucer touched the wood without making a sound. "They said she panicked," he said. "They said she was too young. I don't care whether she was young or old. All I know is that there were 7 people being paid to stand exactly where they were supposed to stand that day, and one of them wasn't where she was supposed to be." He looked up. "What do you think?" Marin turned the small spoon on the saucer, so the handle pointed toward him. I don't know anything about that, sir. You don't have an opinion? I'm only the person who brings the coffee. Raffaele watched her for a moment, then pulled the file closer and opened it. Fair enough, he said. Go on downstairs. Yes, sir. She picked up the tray with her left hand. She walked 3 steps to the door, opened it, stepped into the hallway, and closed it behind her with her right hand, gently, until she heard the latch settle into place. The second-floor hallway was dark and long. She walked its full length with the tray still held level at her waist in her left hand. She passed the guard at his post, and he nodded to her, and she nodded back. She turned the corner and stepped down onto the first stair, then the second, then the third. At the landing between the 2 floors, she stopped. She set the tray down on one of the steps. Then she reached out with her right hand, touched the wall beside her, and leaned the full weight of her body against it. She stayed that way. There was no sound. The knuckles of the hand pressed to the wall had gone white. Downstairs, Nunzia was locking the kitchen door. Marin heard the soft clink of keys, then the fading shuffle of slippers. She heard all of it. She counted her breaths. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 20, exactly as she'd once been taught to count, when she needed to keep her hands from shaking in front of a door that hadn't yet been opened. At 20, she took her hand away from the wall. She picked up the tray, finished walking downstairs, carried it into the kitchen, washed the cup, turned it upside down on the rack, and hung the towel back on its hook. Then she returned to her room, closed the door, and looked at the cloth bag still lying beside the foot of the bed. She didn't touch it. She pulled open the desk drawer, took out the hardbound notebook, turned to the first blank page, and sat for a very long time with the pen in her hand without being able to write a single word. Finally, she wrote 1 line, then closed the notebook. He doesn't know. For 4 weeks, he's been sitting 1 door away from me, and he doesn't know. Thursday morning, Sardi brought in a contract and placed it in front of Raffaele, explaining that after what had happened, the old system was no longer enough. It's still the same company that handles the house, he said. They've installed every camera here since your father was still alive. 6 full years without a single mistake. I don't want strangers brought into the house right now. We're only expanding the system, adding more coverage along the eastern wall, sensors on the 3 side doors, and they'll station someone here overnight. Otis read the contract, nodded, and said he had no objection, as long as their people gave notice every time they touched any piece of equipment. At 11 o'clock, the contractor's vehicle came through the gate. Marin was wiping down the railing of the main staircase when she heard people entering the foyer, and she looked up. The man stood about 50 feet away, carrying a leather case and shaking Otis's hand. His hair was grayer now. He was heavier, but the way he stood hadn't changed. His feet set shoulder-width apart, one hand tucked into his trouser pocket, his head tilted slightly backward when he listened to someone speak. Marin had sat across from that posture in a small room on the 3rd floor of the Central District Police Headquarters for 4 straight hours, on the night when the sleeve of her uniform hadn't even had time to dry. She finished wiping the railing very slowly and kept working until he disappeared into the security room. At noon, Nunzia told her to bring water into the small meeting room on the ground floor, where Otis and the contractor's people had spread building plans across the table. Marin set down the tray. Errol Quint looked up, and she saw the exact moment he recognized her. A moment so brief that the pen in his hand only stopped halfway through a line. Otis was called outside to take a phone call. The technician followed him out to collect some tools. That left 2 people in the room, separated by a table covered in blueprints. Ashgrove, Quint said. He read the name from the employee badge pinned to her pocket. Yes. People say there was a maid who pulled the boss to the floor. He folded the blueprint slowly. I've been wondering who it was. Marin didn't answer. You should leave this place, he said. You said the same thing 4 years ago. Quint's hand stopped. Then he laughed. A short laugh with nothing in it. Back then I said it because I felt sorry for you. You were young. You could have gone somewhere else, found another job, lived in another city, and no one would have remembered you. Instead, you chose to stay here, knocking on every door you could find, writing petitions, filing appeals, demanding that people reopen the case. What did it get you? 3 years sleeping on the street, she said. Exactly, he nodded. And now you're cleaning house for the son of that man. When are you planning to tell him? Marin didn't answer. Quint picked up his leather case, tucked it beneath one arm, and said the final sentence in the calm voice of someone discussing the weather. "Is your mother still out near Ashland?" The hand Marin had resting on the edge of the tray didn't move. "She still likes to sit in that chair by the window, doesn't she?" he said. "I remember you mentioning that back then. Old people tend to stay in one place. Easy to find." He walked out. At the doorway, he turned back. "Think about it. They give you 3 weeks' pay and send you on your way. That's already kinder than most people would be." Marin worked normally that afternoon. She cleaned the ground floor, replaced the towels in 3 bathrooms, and helped Nunzia reorganize the linen room. That evening, after taking coffee up to the study and coming back down to wash the cup, she didn't return to her room. She took the ring of keys hanging in the kitchen and made a circuit around the house. She checked the kitchen door, the storage room, the back door, the eastern side door, the 2 secondary doors leading into the garden, and the door down to the garage. She didn't simply turn the knobs. She opened every door, closed it again, and listened for the sound of the latch settling into the strike plate, because a locked door could still be opened if the latch sounded hollow. The lock on the eastern side door sounded hollow. She stood in front of it for a long time. Then she went into the storage room, found a chair, dragged it out, wedged its back beneath the doorknob, and pushed against the door once from the inside to make sure it wouldn't move. Before returning to her room, she took out the notebook and added 3 more lines. The last line contained only a question she still couldn't answer. Why, out of every contractor in this city, was he the man who had installed every camera in the Belandi family house for the past 6 years? Sunday morning, she asked for 3 hours off and didn't say where she was going. The place was a self-storage facility in Bridgeport, in the lowest row, unit number 27. She had paid the rent on that unit with the last of her money before she ended up on the street. And for 3 years she had barely managed to keep paying for it, but she had never once opened it. The lock squealed when she turned it. Inside there was only 1 cardboard box. In that box were the things they had mailed back to her after taking away her badge. A jacket, 2 commendation certificates, a framed photograph from graduation day, and at the very bottom, the blue case file her court-appointed attorney had handed back to her on the final day, along with the words that she should keep it because maybe someday it would be useful. She sat down on the concrete floor and opened the file. A copy of her witness statement, 3 pages, dated November 19th. She read page 1. She read page 2. She reached the 4th line of page 3 and stopped. Then she went back to page 2 and started again from the beginning, more slowly this time, 1 line at a time. The statement said that she had seen light reflecting from the roof of the building across the street. It said that she had left her assigned position. It said that she had moved toward Mr. Belandi. It said that she had been injured. It said that she had remained with him until the ambulance arrived. Then the statement moved on to the next question. There wasn't a single word about what he had said. She remembered very clearly that she had reported it. She remembered that room, the metal table, the paper cup of water she hadn't taken a single sip from. She remembered saying the sentence 3 times, because the first time her voice had broken in the middle, the second time the man sitting across from her told her to repeat it louder, and the third time he lowered his head and began to write. She had watched him write it down. She turned to the bottom of page 3, where the statement taker's signature appeared. Slanted handwriting, middle name reduced to an initial. Sergeant Errol Quint. Marin sat motionless on the cold concrete floor with the file open across her lap. And inside her mind, the past 4 years began rearranging themselves into a different order. For 4 years, she had believed they buried her because of 2 seconds. That if she had been faster, if she had shouted before she ran, if she had followed procedure exactly, everything might have been different. She had believed she lost everything because of a professional mistake. But people didn't erase a dying man's words because of a professional mistake. They erased words because those words were dangerous. Don't let the boy trust anyone inside the house. Those were the words of a dying man spoken to the only person beside him, and that person had been a 23-year-old woman in uniform who happened to be assigned to that street corner. If those words had appeared in the official statement, the investigation would have been forced to ask an entirely different question. Not who fired the shot, but who knew he would pass through that place, at what time, and by which route. The investigation would have had to turn inward. Instead, they took her and placed her inside that empty space. A young officer abandoned her post. The entire city was given a clean, simple answer to read for 11 straight days, and no one asked anything more. She hadn't been buried because she moved 2 seconds too slowly. She had been buried because she heard something someone didn't want anyone else to hear. And the man who recorded her statement that night, the man who decided which sentences went onto the page and which ones didn't, had walked through the Belandi foyer last Thursday, carrying a leather case, and had installed every camera in that house for the past 6 years. Marin closed the file. She remained sitting there for a while longer. Then she did 3 things. She took out the 3 pages of the statement, folded them in half, and slipped them into the lining of her coat. She closed the cardboard box, pushed it back against the wall, and locked the storage unit. And on the bus ride back, she opened the hardbound notebook, turned through every page she had filled, reached the next blank page, and wrote across the top in capital letters a sentence she hadn't allowed herself to write in 4 years. From today on, she wasn't trying to reclaim her honor anymore. She was going to find the name of the person who had taken it from her. From that night on, before returning to her room, Marin made one more round through the house, not to check the locks, to count. On the 3rd night, close to 1 o'clock in the morning, she passed the landing of the service staircase and saw a strip of yellow light spilling through the gap beneath the garage door. Inside the garage, the camera control cabinet in the corner had been opened. A man wearing the contractor's uniform jacket was bent over in front of it, holding a small device plugged into the lower port, and beside his foot a flashlight lay on its side so the beam wouldn't reach the ceiling. A maintenance worker had no reason to hide his light. Marin didn't call out. She moved toward him. He heard her and turned too late, and the whole thing was over in about 4 seconds. With his right arm locked behind his back and his body forced forward against the cabinet, he struggled once, then stopped. "Stay still," she said. "If you fight me again, I'll tighten my hold. I'm not letting go." She kept him there and shouted for help. The gate guard came down first. 2 of Otis's men came after him, and Otis arrived last with his shirt still partly unbuttoned. He looked at the open cabinet, looked at the device still plugged in, then looked at Marin. While the 2 guards escorted the man upstairs, Marin bent down and picked up the access card that had slipped from his breast pocket and fallen onto the concrete floor. She read the sequence of letters and numbers printed on it. Then she read it again. After that, she handed the card to Otis. "Have someone write down this card number," she said. "And write down the time, too." 1:17, Otis said without looking at a clock. The man sat in the security room and said very little. He said he'd been sent to check the signal line because the system had reported an error that afternoon. He said he was authorized to enter the garage because the new contract allowed the overnight technician access to all equipment. He said the device plugged into the cabinet was standard company signal testing equipment. Otis asked why he hadn't notified him first. The man said he had, through the company office, and whether the office had called the house or not, he didn't know. Otis asked why the flashlight had been laid on its side. The man said that if he stood it upright, the light shone in his eyes. At 3 o'clock in the morning, Sarti arrived. He entered the security room, listened to Otis explain everything in 4 minutes, then sat down and rubbed both temples. "Let him go," he said. Otis looked up. "Sir, let him go," Sarti repeated, his voice still mild. "We signed an expanded contract with that company 4 days ago. Now we're holding one of their men in the middle of the night. Tomorrow morning they ask why. What exactly are we supposed to say? That a maid saw a maintenance technician doing maintenance and twisted his arm behind his back?" He looked around the room. "Did he damage anything? Is anything missing? Did he open a door for anyone?" Otis remained silent. "Then release him," Sarti said. "I'm not defending the man. I simply don't want this house turned into a joke while someone is aiming at our windows. Tell the company that from now on, anyone entering the garage at night must be accompanied by one of our people. That's the end of it." Otis looked toward Raffaele, who had been standing against the doorframe the entire time without speaking. Raffaele said nothing. At 3:20, the gate opened, and the man's car drove away. Marin stood at the end of the hallway and watched the 2 red taillights until they disappeared beyond the fence. Then she returned to her room, closed the door, and opened the notebook beneath the desk lamp. She wrote 3 lines. The first was the sequence of letters and numbers from the access card, every character written in full, without abbreviating anything. The second was the time he entered and the time he left, 1:17 and 3:20. The third was a question, and she wrote it more slowly than the other 2 lines. In this entire house, the one man who hadn't set foot in the garage once during the past 4 weeks was the same man who appeared there at 3 o'clock in the morning, after someone had called him, only to say one thing: let that man go. The house stood at the end of a quiet street on the north side, and the man who opened the door took a moment to recognize her. "Vale," he said. "My God." Wendell Pryor looked older than she remembered, but he still stood in the doorway the same way, one hand holding the door, the other braced against his hip, looking her over from head to toe with the eyes of someone who had once made a living reading people. Then he stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in. It's cold out there." He poured her a cup of tea and sat across from her, and he didn't ask where she had been living for the past 3 years. He asked only one question: "What do you need?" Marin placed the 3 pages of the statement on the table, turning the printed side toward him. "Read page 2 for me." Pryor put on his glasses. He read it, and he took longer than anyone needed to read a single page. Then he removed his glasses. "What he said to you," he said. "It isn't there?" "It isn't." Marin nodded. "I know," he answered. She looked up. "I've known for 4 years," Pryor said. "I listened to the recording of your interview. The sentence is on the tape. It isn't in the written statement. I wrote a memorandum about it and sent it up the chain. 3 days later, they called me into an office and told me the case had already been resolved, that I was wasting everyone's time, and that if I was uncomfortable with that, I had 14 months left until I reached 30 years of service, and I ought to think about it." He turned the cup slowly in his hands. "So I thought about it." Marin sat still. "If you want to hear me apologize, then I'm sorry," he said. "But apologies are cheap, so I'd rather give you this instead." He stood, went out through the back door, and she heard him pull open a wooden door on the storage shed in the yard. He came back carrying a square cardboard box tied with string, a faded number written across the top in marker. He set it on the table between them. "These are the things I kept before the file was sealed," he said. "A copy of the interview recording, my memorandum, and the written response to it. The protection details duty log from that day, the original position assignment sheet, the real original, not the version attached to the official report, and the route change order signed 40 minutes before departure." Marin touched the edge of the box. "You've kept this for 4 years?" "4 years," Pryor said. "Not because I thought there would ever be a day when it might be useful. I kept it because if I'd thrown it away, I would have made myself an accomplice." He sat down again. "I haven't opened it once. I kept it out in the shed under a stack of paint cans. My wife asked me once what was inside. I told her old paperwork. She died last year. I suppose she still thought it was old paperwork when she went." Marin asked him only one question: "Who signed the route change order?" Pryor looked at her. "Open it and see for yourself. But I'm warning you first, so you're prepared. If you open this box, you won't be able to close it again. For the past 4 years, you've been a disgraced police officer who lost her job. People pitied you. People forgot you. And that is how you stayed alive. Open this, and you become someone who knows something. People don't forget someone who knows something." "I've spent 3 years living on the street, sir," she said. "I don't have anything left to protect." "You do," Pryor said. "You have a mother on the south side." Marin's head snapped up. "I still have a few old friends," he said. "I asked about you a few times over the past 3 years. I couldn't find you, but I found her." He pushed the box toward her. "So listen to me. Don't take this box back to wherever you're staying. Don't keep it in the same place you sleep. Copy whatever you need, but leave the originals here, in the house of an old man no one pays attention to. If something happens to you, leave me one name and one address. I'll take this box there." Marin sat for a very long time, with both hands resting on the lid. Then she pulled the string loose. "Let me borrow your pen," she said. Otis Frayne knocked on the study door at 7 o'clock that evening, and he wasn't carrying a file, only a thin envelope tucked beneath one arm. "You ordered the old man's case reopened," he said. "The attorney's archive sent over 3 boxes of photographs. I've been going through them since noon." Raffaele closed the expense ledger he'd been reading. "What did you find?" "I wasn't looking for this," Otis said. "I only happened across it." He took a photograph from the envelope and placed it on the desk, turning it toward Raffaele. It had been taken from across the street at a slight angle, the kind of photograph snapped quickly at night. Orange streetlight. A car stopped crooked at the curb, its rear door still open. And on the sidewalk, between 2 uniformed figures who were standing, there was a third person kneeling, her back bent forward, one arm slipped beneath the neck of the man lying on the pavement. The person kneeling was a woman. Her hair was tied neatly back. Her head was lowered. Her face couldn't be seen clearly. "I can't read a name anywhere in the photograph," Otis said. "There's no caption. I couldn't trace the name either, because I can't get into police personnel files." Raffaele looked at the photograph. "Then why are you showing it to me?" "Because of the shoulder," Otis said. Raffaele looked up. "Look at these two people standing here," Otis pointed. "They're standing normally, shoulders level and relaxed. But this woman kneeling has her left shoulder lower than her right, and her back stays straight even while she's leaning forward. People don't kneel that way unless they're used to kneeling that way." He took out a second photograph and placed it beside the first. It was a still image taken from this very house's second-floor hallway camera, showing a woman carrying a tray as she walked past. The tray balanced in her left hand, her right arm hanging loose, her left shoulder lower than her right. "I've spent 4 hours comparing these two," Otis said. "I won't tell you I'm certain, sir. I'm only saying that if you asked me to bet, I'd bet." Raffaele didn't touch either photograph. He looked at them both, one after the other, and he looked for so long that Otis had to shift his weight from one foot to the other. "Have you told anyone?" "No one." "Don't." Raffaele stood, walked to the newly installed window, and stopped there with his back turned. "Go home, sir. Go home, Otis." Otis left and closed the door behind him. Raffaele remained by the window for a long time. Below, the garden lights shut off on their timer, one section after another, and the house slowly sank into darkness in the same order he'd known since he was a boy. At 9:30, there was a knock at the door, and she came in carrying his coffee as she did every evening. He was still standing with his back to the room. He heard the tray being set on the edge of the desk, the coffee pouring, the cup touching the saucer, the handle of the spoon being turned so it faced him. "Your coffee, sir." "Thank you." She left. The door closed. Raffaele turned and looked at the coffee cup resting to his right. 3 finger joints from the edge of the desk, exactly where it had been placed every night for the past 4 weeks. He didn't drink it. He sat down, pulled the 2 photographs in front of him, and remained there in a room lit by a single desk lamp. There were no voices in his head, no anger. He simply sat and allowed one thing after another to arrange itself into place. The night beneath the bridge, when he'd asked whether she wanted to come work for him, and she had answered with 3 questions. And he'd thought that was what a sensible person should do. 4 weeks of her moving through his house, wiping stair rails, replacing towels, carrying coffee, and never once asking what he did for a living, the way she'd ordered him to stay down, the way she'd known the man on the roof wouldn't fire a second shot, and the evening when he'd sat at this same desk and told her about a 23-year-old female officer who had abandoned her position, spoken that last name aloud in front of her, then asked what she thought. She had poured the coffee. She had set down the cup. She had said she was only the person who brought the coffee. The watch on his wrist was still stopped at 8:14, just as it had been for 4 years. At 5 minutes to midnight, he reached out and pressed the house bell twice. When she reached the study, the door was already open, and the only light inside came from a single desk lamp. Raffaele sat behind the desk. "Close the door." Marin closed it. "Come here." She walked over and stopped 1 step from the desk. He turned the photograph around and pushed it toward her, then said nothing for a long time. She looked down. Orange streetlight. The car stopped at an angle, the woman kneeling on the sidewalk. "You have slept under my roof for 2 weeks, he said. Marin didn't reach out to touch the photograph. She looked at it for a few more seconds, then raised her eyes, and when she spoke, her voice sounded nothing like it had at any other moment during the past 4 weeks. 21 days, she said. "You are 7 days short." He didn't answer. "My name is Marin Vale," she said. "Ashgrove is my mother's last name. I used her name because if I had given Mrs. Nunzia my real one, she would never have let me through the door. Where do you want me to start?" "At the beginning." "At the beginning, I was assigned to the north corner, about 65 feet from where the car stopped," she said. "There were 7 of us up there. The other 6 were watching the street because procedure said we were supposed to watch the street, watch the crowd, watch the vehicles approaching. I had a habit of looking up. The man who trained me used to say that when danger comes from above, it always arrives before the sound of it does." She paused. "I saw a flash of light on the roof across the street. I was the only one who saw it." "Did you call it in over the radio?" "No," she said. "I had 2 choices. Press the radio button and finish a sentence. Or run. Finishing a sentence takes about 3 seconds. Running 65 feet takes about 4. I didn't have 7 seconds. I chose to run. And you left your position? I left my position, she answered. The report is correct about that. I abandoned my assigned post without authorization, and the northern approach was left uncovered. I have never argued that, not then and not now. Raffaele sat perfectly still. I reached him and put out my hands to pull your father down, she said. I was 2 seconds too late. She stopped. This time the silence lasted longer. 2 seconds, she said. For 4 years, I have thought about those 2 seconds. I have wondered what would have happened if I hadn't glanced behind me once. If I hadn't collided with a pedestrian in the middle of the run. If my legs had been longer. You don't need to blame me, sir. I have been doing that every night for 4 years, and I have done it far more thoroughly than you ever could. She raised one hand to her collar, opened the top 2 buttons, and pulled the fabric aside to the left. Beneath her collarbone was a small round scar, pale with age. The second bullet, she said, then buttoned her shirt again. The report says I was wounded. It doesn't say what position I was in when I was hit. They left it that way, and anyone reading it naturally assumes I was shot while running away. Raffaele rose from his chair. He didn't move toward her. He simply stood with both hands braced against the desk. What else? He asked. There is more, she said. I stayed with your father until the ambulance arrived. He remained conscious for about a minute, maybe a little longer. He grabbed my wrist, very hard. Hard enough that there were marks on my skin the next day. Then he said something to me. She looked directly at him. He said, "Don't let the boy trust anyone inside the house." The desk lamp gave a faint hum. He said it twice, she continued. Then he stopped breathing. Raffaele didn't move. That night, I gave that sentence 3 times during my interview, she said. The first time, I couldn't finish it. The man across from me told me to speak louder. The third time, he lowered his head and wrote it down. I watched him write. She slipped one hand into the lining of her coat, took out 3 folded sheets of paper, opened them, and placed them on the desk beside the photograph. This is a copy of the statement. Read page 2. That sentence isn't there. Not one word of it. She stepped back half a pace. The man who took my statement signed his name at the bottom of page 3, she said. Sergeant Errol Quint. Last Thursday, he walked through the foyer of this house carrying a leather case. Raffaele looked down at the 3 pages. He didn't pick them up. He stood there with both hands still braced against the desk for a very long time. Long enough for Marin to hear the clock ticking in the hallway outside. Then he walked around the desk, past her, opened the door, and left the room. He didn't say a single word. At 7 o'clock that morning, Sardi arrived with 2 of his men and demanded that Otis allow them to search the entire servants' quarters. He said he'd spent the whole night thinking and couldn't allow this to drag on any longer. Otis objected. Sardi told him to call the boss if he wanted. So Otis called, and Raffaele's phone went unanswered. They searched Marin's room in less than 4 minutes. Beneath her pillow, they found a handgun wrapped in a handkerchief and a paper envelope filled with cash. The bank strap around the bills still intact. By 8 o'clock, everyone in the house had gathered in the large living room. Sarti never raised his voice once. He stood beside the low table where the gun and the envelope had been placed, his hands clasped behind his back, and spoke in the sorrowful voice of a man being forced to say something he wished he didn't have to say. I warned you, he said. I warned you the morning after that night. Now all of you can look for yourselves. He pointed to the envelope. This is bank cash, still strapped, which means it was withdrawn recently. A maid paid by the week doesn't come by a stack of money like this. He pointed to the gun. And this needs no explanation from me. Then he turned to the others. Her name isn't Ashgrove. Her name is Vale. 4 years ago she was a police officer, and she was part of the protective detail the day the boy's father was shot. She was the one thrown off the force because of what happened. A murmur moved through the room. The gate guard standing at the door turned his head and looked at Marin. Think about it, Sarti said. A woman like that ends up sitting under a bridge on the exact night the boy happens to pass by, so he can pick her up and bring her home. Then, 3 weeks later, a bullet comes through the window, and she's the only person in the house who knows it's coming. 1 shot, and then nothing. No one dies, no one is hurt, and only one thing changes. From that night on, the boy trusts her. That wasn't an assassination attempt. It was a performance designed to open the door so an outsider could get into this house. He placed one hand on the envelope. Doyle paid her to do it. The room fell silent. Then Nunzia Cavallo stepped forward half a pace. May I say something? Sarti turned toward her. Go ahead. I've worked in this house for 31 years, she said. I was cold to this girl from the day she walked through the door. Everyone here knows it. I barely spoke to her for 2 weeks. So I'm not defending her because I like her. She pointed at the gun. I'm defending her because this is too stupid. Sarti frowned. That girl has cleaned this house for almost a month, Nunzia said. She knows which rooms have spare keys. She knows no one opens the linen cabinet on the 3rd floor for 6 months at a time. She knows there's a hollow space beneath the 3rd stair where I've been stuffing cleaning rags since the lady of the house was still alive. There are hundreds of places to hide something in this house. And I'm supposed to believe she hid a gun under her pillow? Under her pillow? In her own room? On the exact morning you happened to send people in to search it? She turned toward Otis. How many years have you been doing this work? Have you ever seen anyone do something that stupid? Otis didn't answer. Sarti smiled and said the housekeeper had a good heart but didn't understand these matters, then moved on. Throughout that entire morning, Marin stood in the middle of the room and didn't say a single word. She didn't argue about the gun. She didn't argue about the envelope. She didn't correct one word of what Sarti said about 4 years earlier. She simply waited until he had finished, then turned toward Otis. I want to ask for one thing, she said. Last night, from around midnight until close to 1 o'clock, did the 2nd floor hallway camera and the camera outside the servants' quarters lose signal? Otis hesitated. Yes, he said, for 40 minutes. Show me the footage from before that and after that, she said. We only need to know who passed through that hallway during that window. I won't need to say anything else. Otis turned toward the control console. He worked for a while, then for longer than a while, and finally he looked up, without meeting anyone's eyes. The footage before and after has both been overwritten, he said. From 11:30 last night until 2 o'clock this morning, there's nothing left. Marin gave one small nod. Yes, she said. Then there's nothing to see. Raffaele returned home close to noon. He listened to Otis's report for 8 minutes without asking a single question, then walked into the large living room where Sarti was still sitting. Keep her here, Sarti said. Take her downstairs. Find out who paid her. I have people who know how to do that. You don't need to involve yourself. No. Raffaele. No, he said. Go home, uncle. I'll handle this. Sarti looked at him for a long time, then stood, picked up his coat, and walked out. At the doorway, he stopped. If you let that woman walk out through this gate, don't expect to ever find her again. I know, Raffaele said. He had her called to the study at 4 o'clock that afternoon. He stood beside the desk instead of sitting. Pack your things, he said. There will be a car here in half an hour to take you away. Marin didn't ask why. She gave one small nod. You have nothing to say? He asked. What would you like me to say, sir? This entire house spent 2 hours talking about you this morning, he said. You stood in the middle of the room and didn't argue a single point, and now you're still not arguing. He stepped half a pace closer. If you're telling the truth, why aren't you asking me to believe you? Marin looked at him. Because I asked once already, she said. 4 years ago. I stood in 3 different rooms and told the same story over and over. And every time I said it louder, people listened less. When a person carries no weight, her words carry no weight either, sir. I learned that. She reached into the pocket of her coat and took out the hardbound notebook. This time I'm letting the paper speak. She placed it on the desk. Everything I've written since the day I bought it is in there. Dates, times, places. None of my conclusions, because my conclusions don't mean anything. Read the last page first. She stepped back. There are only 2 people in this entire house with the authority to shut down the cameras remotely. Both names are on the final page. Read them yourself. She left the room. Half an hour later, she stood at the back door with the cloth bag over her shoulder, the same door Nunzia had led her through a month earlier while explaining the 3 rules of the house. It was raining outside. Nunzia pressed a paper parcel containing bread and an apple into her hands without saying anything, and Marin said nothing either. The car dropped her at an intersection about 2.5 miles from the estate. The driver handed her an envelope and told her it contained a full month's wages. Marin took it, thanked him, and stood watching as the car turned around and disappeared. She walked 20 minutes to the nearest bus stop. She reached the south side close to 7 o'clock that evening. At the reception desk, the evening attendant looked at her name in the visitor's log and told her that Mrs. Vale had been transferred at 10 o'clock that morning. Transferred where? The facility on the west side, the attendant said. Today's the last day of the month, Miss Ashgrove. The manager called you 3 times. Marin took out her phone. 3 missed calls, all of them from that morning, during the hours when she'd been standing in the middle of the large living room listening to people talk about her. I have the money, she said. Can I pay now? She's already gone, the attendant answered. You'll have to start the paperwork again over there. They don't allow visitors after 6. Marin stood at the reception desk for a while, then thanked the attendant and walked outside. It was still raining. She sat down on the bench at the bus stop across the street, set the cloth bag beside her feet, and remained there while 3 buses arrived and left one after another. That morning, she'd still had a place to sleep, a job that paid her every week, and a mother sitting beside a window waiting for a husband who had been dead for 10 years. By evening, she had none of those 3 things left. She opened the paper parcel Nunzia had given her. Inside were 2 slices of bread made into a sandwich and 1 apple. She looked at them for a long time. Then she wrapped everything again, tied the string, and put the parcel into her bag. She wasn't hungry enough to eat it yet. And 3 years on the street had taught her that whatever you still had left, you didn't spend too quickly. Raffaele read the final page first, exactly as she had instructed. There were 2 names on it, Errol Quint and Orlando Sarti. He called Otis upstairs, and they sat in the study from 9 o'clock that night until the following morning, with the notebook open between them on the desk and 3 stacks of documents Raffaele had ordered pulled from the attorney's archives. Otis was the first to speak, sometime around 2 o'clock in the morning, after they had gone through the first 30 pages. She warned me, he said, about the flower truck and the camera being out of position. She stood in the doorway of the security room and told me everything from beginning to end. And I sat there listening, then told her to mind her own work, because this house already had 11 people being paid to take care of it. He placed one hand on the notebook. Sir, I owe her an apology. Then save it and tell her, Raffaele answered without looking up. Telling me doesn't do anything for her. At 4 o'clock in the morning, they stopped at an entry dated October 19th, a sequence of letters and numbers. Entry time, 1:17. Exit time, 3:20. Otis recognized it immediately. The access card from the man I released that night, he said. This number is issued by the company. Every employee gets one, and this number is tied to the maintenance contract, not to the individual person. At noon, Raffaele sent a car to Wendell Pryor's house. The old man opened the door, looked at the 2 men standing on his porch, and asked only one question. Is she all right? She isn't staying with me anymore, Raffaele said. I'm here because of the box. Pryor didn't invite them inside immediately. He remained in the doorway for another moment. She told me that if anyone ever came asking about this box, it had to be you who came, not one of your men, he said. And you came yourself? He brought out the box and placed it on the kitchen table, then took a thin sheet of paper from inside and handed it to Raffaele first. The order changing the escort route, dated November 19th. The signing time was recorded, 40 minutes before departure. At the bottom was the signature of the person who authorized the change. Slanted handwriting, middle name reduced to an initial, Sergeant Errol Quint. The original route went through the courthouse side entrance, Pryor said. It was covered. They would have stepped out of the car and gone straight inside. The new route had them stop on Michigan Avenue, get out, and walk 10 steps across an open sidewalk. No one could ever explain why it was changed. The man who signed the order said traffic control had requested it. Traffic control had no written request on file. Raffaele read the page twice. Then he folded it and slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat. That afternoon, the family attorney arrived with the financial comparison Raffaele had ordered when he reopened the case. The maintenance contract linked to that access card number had been paid quarterly for 6 straight years from the account of the security company registered under Errol Quint's name. But beyond the company's regular payments, there was a second stream of money flowing into the same business, steady and regular, twice every year, with no service invoices attached to it. The source of that second stream was a private trust. Raffaele turned to the page naming the person who had established the trust. Orlando Sarti. He sat perfectly still. Otis stood beside the desk and didn't dare say anything. Inside Raffaele's mind, everything began sliding into place, slowly. without a sound. His father hadn't died because 7 police officers stood in the wrong places. His father died because someone had changed the route 40 minutes before departure, and the man who changed that route had been paid twice a year for 6 years by the man who had held Raffaele in his arms before he could walk. And once it was over, that same man needed a name to fill the empty space, a name small enough that no one would defend it. So they chose a 23-year-old woman in uniform, the only person who had heard the final words his father ever spoke. Then Raffaele thought about the morning he had sat in the study and announced in front of his uncle that he was reopening every file connected to his father's death. 3 weeks later, the window shattered. He stood, walked to the window, and remained there with his back turned for a very long time. Otis waited. Finally, Raffaele spoke, and his voice was as quiet as ever, so quiet that Otis had to lean forward to hear him. "Call the lawyer, call Mr. Pryor, and find her, and bring her back to me." "And Mr. Sardi, sir?" "Invite my uncle to dinner," Raffaele said. Friday evening at 7 o'clock, 8 people sat around the long table in the grand dining room, every one of them someone who had been sitting at that table since his father's time. Orlando Sarti was seated in his usual place, at Raffaele's right hand. No one had brought anything with them, because for 30 years no one in this house had been permitted to carry anything into the dining room. The first course was served and taken away again with almost no one touching it. Raffaele waited until the door closed behind the last server. "I asked all of you here for one reason," he said. "It isn't business." He placed the hardbound notebook on the table. "These are the notes of someone who worked in this house for nearly a month. There are no conclusions in it, only dates, times, and places. Pass it around and read it. I won't rush you." He placed a second document on the table. "This is the order changing my father's escort route, signed 40 minutes before departure. The man who signed it was Sergeant Errol Quint. The original route entered through a covered gate. The new route stopped on the avenue, where he had to get out and walk 10 steps across an open sidewalk." He placed down a third file. "This is a memorandum written 4 years ago by a supervising investigator named Wendell Pryor. It states that the recording of a witness interview contains a sentence that was omitted from the written statement. Attached to it is the official response ordering him to stop pursuing the matter." He placed down a fourth file. "This is the maintenance contract between this house and Mr. Quint's company. 6 years of quarterly payments, tied to an access card number. That same number appears in the notebook I just placed in front of you, entered on the night of October 19th, with an entry time of 1:17 and an exit time of 3:20. That night, the person carrying that card was caught inside my garage and released on the order of someone sitting at this table." Then he placed down the final sheet. "And this is a second stream of money flowing into Mr. Quint's company, twice a year, for 6 straight years, with no service invoices attached. The source was a private trust. The name of the person who established that trust is on the 4th line from the top. No one passed that page around." The man sitting closest simply leaned forward, read it, then straightened again. Sardi placed both hands on the edge of the table. "What are you planning to do?" he asked. "I'm planning to listen to you." Sardi nodded slowly. He looked around the table once, and when he began to speak, his voice was just as warm as it had been that morning in the kitchen when he asked a maid where she came from. "I did it for the family," he said. "Your father was my friend for 30 years, but during the last 3, he stopped listening to anyone. He intended to testify in court. Everyone sitting here remembers that. He intended to stand up and say things that would have made half the people in this room pay a price. I tried to stop him. I tried for 4 months. He wouldn't listen." He looked directly at Raffaele. "I never wanted anyone to die. I only wanted him to stop. I was told that one warning would be enough, and I believed it." "And what about the 23-year-old girl?" Raffaele asked. Sardi was silent. "You didn't kill her," Raffaele said. "You only took away her name and left her to spend 3 years on the street carrying what you put on it. You call that doing it for the family? I had nothing to do with that part. You paid the man who did, twice a year, for 6 years, Raffaele said. Then he stood. "Listen carefully. A plan that required my father to fall on a sidewalk so you could keep your place at this table wasn't a decision made for the family. You can call it whatever you want. It won't change what it was." He tapped one finger against the stack of papers. "I've made 3 copies of everything here. Mr. Pryor has 1. 1 is at the attorney's office. The 3rd, Monday morning, Mr. Pryor will take to federal agent Marisol Reyes, who has been following Quint's name for 2 years without ever having enough to begin. A chair scraped backward at the far end of the table. One man spoke. If you give this to the federal government, they won't stop there, Raffaele. They'll dig through everything. The docks, the unions, all of it. I know, he said. I've already instructed the attorneys to open all 3 areas voluntarily, at the same time, before they ask. The entire table went silent. My father intended to stand up and tell the truth, Raffaele said. 4 years ago, he didn't get the chance to finish. I will finish it for him. Monday morning, Pryor carried the files into the federal building. By Wednesday afternoon, both Sardi and Quint had been arrested. The person who found her was Otis Frayne. It took him 11 days, and he found her at a shelter on the west side of the city, 2 intersections away from Mrs. Delphine's new care facility. He didn't go inside. He stood on the sidewalk across the street and waited until she came out, then took off his hat and told her exactly what he'd owed her since that first week, that she had stood in the doorway of the security room and told him everything from beginning to end. And he had sat there listening before telling her to mind her own work. Marin listened until he finished. Then she thanked him and said he hadn't needed to come all that way just to say one sentence. The case was reopened in January. The recording of her interview was compared against the written statement, and it was formally noted that part of her testimony had been omitted from the record. The original position assignment was produced alongside the route change order. The previous finding that the protective perimeter had failed because an officer abandoned her post was replaced with a much shorter conclusion, stating that Officer Vale's decision fell within reasonable situational judgment and wasn't the cause of what happened. They sent her a letter and an appointment. At that appointment, they restored her service record, reinstated the pension benefits that had been taken from her, and asked whether she wanted to apply to return to the force, because with her record corrected, she was fully eligible. Marin thanked them and said no. She offered no further explanation. 3 days later, she went to the West Side Care Facility to finish the paperwork for transferring her mother back to the old place, and the person at the reception desk told her that Mrs. Delphine had already been moved 2 weeks earlier. Where was she transferred? To a facility on the north side, the attendant answered, reading out the name of the place, the very same facility Marin had called 2 years earlier to ask about prices, and had hung up immediately after hearing the answer. Who arranged the transfer? A law office sent over the paperwork. All expenses have been prepaid for 3 years. She went there that same afternoon, not to visit her mother, but to demand a copy of the contract. In the section naming the payer, there was only the name of a law office. She wrote down the address. The following Monday morning, she went to see Raffaele at that law office rather than at the estate, and she placed a copy of the contract on the desk before sitting down. "You can't buy my name back for me," she said. "I'm not buying anything," he replied. "I'm paying a debt." "What debt?" "My father fell into your arms, and you bled because of him," he said. "For 4 years, my family has owed you something without anyone knowing it. Whether you accept it or not, that debt still exists." Marin was quiet for a while. "I'll accept it," she said, "but not this way." She pulled the paper toward herself. "First, I'll accept the cost of 3 years because I can't afford it, and I'm not going to pretend I can. But it has to be written as a contract between me and the law office, with a fixed term, a stated amount, and my name signed on it. Not a favor someone can take away whenever they choose." "Agreed." "Second, nothing continues after those 3 years. No extension, no additional payment, and no one calls that facility to tell them to take better care of her. Starting in the 4th year, she's my responsibility." "Agreed." "Third," she said, "your name doesn't appear on any document connected to my mother. She doesn't need to know about any of this, and I don't want there to come a day when I have to explain it to her." Raffaele looked at her for a moment, then called the attorney into the room and told him to rewrite everything exactly according to those 3 conditions. That afternoon, Marin went to the facility on the north side. Mrs. Delphine was sitting beside the window with both hands resting in her lap. Marin pulled a chair closer and took out the comb. Her mother turned and looked at her. She looked longer than usual, much longer, and in her eyes there was something struggling to rise through the surface of deep water. "You're home," she said. Marin couldn't answer. "Mrs." Delphine turned back toward the window. "Remind my husband to buy bread," she said. "He forgets all the time." "Yes, ma'am," Marin said. "I'll remember." Then she began brushing her mother's hair from the crown downward, one slow stroke at a time, and she kept brushing it all afternoon. The office was on the ground floor of an old row building near Pilsen. 2 rooms, 1 whiteboard, and 12 plastic chairs arranged in 2 rows. On the glass door was a simple black-lettered sign bearing her name and 1 line beneath it, "Free personal safety classes." Most of the students were women from shelters. Some came from a homeless center on the south side, and a few walked more than a mile to get there. Marin taught them very small things: where to sit in an unfamiliar room, look up before looking down, remember faces, remember times, remember directions. Once is chance, twice is coincidence. 3 times means don't tell yourself you're imagining it. She never explained why she knew those things. Friday afternoon, just as the class was ending, there was a knock at the front door. Marin looked through the glass and saw Raffaele Belandi standing outside on the sidewalk, alone, no car, no one with him. She walked over and opened the front door. "Come in." He stepped inside, looked around the 2 rooms, looked at the whiteboard still covered with the writing from the class that had just ended, then sat down in one of the plastic chairs like anyone else. Outside, it was already dark. "They say you have to testify for the 3rd time next week," she said. "The 4th, he answered, "but this one will be short." He rested his hands on his knees, and Marin noticed the watch on his left wrist. The second hand was moving. She said nothing about it. He reached into his coat pocket, took out a paper-wrapped parcel, and placed it on the table between them. Then he opened it, picked up the sandwich inside, and broke it in half. He held 1 half out to her. "Last time, you gave away the last thing you had," he said. "I owe you half." Marin looked at the half sandwich in his hand. Outside on the narrow street, someone was pulling down a metal storefront gate, and a bus passed before disappearing around the corner. She reached out and took it. That night, beneath the Wacker Drive overpass, when she broke her last meal in half and gave part of it to an old stranger, she hadn't thought anything of it. She didn't know anyone was watching. She didn't know that 4 years of silence were about to be given back to her. She had simply seen someone hungrier than she was, and she shared. There are acts of kindness we do in the darkness when no one is watching, and we believe they disappear with the rain. But kindness never truly disappears. It only travels a very long road before finding its way back to us at the moment we need it most. And a person's worth isn't measured by where they sleep tonight, but by what they manage to keep inside themselves after everything else has been taken away. Some people lose their homes, their work, even their own name, and still don't lose their kindness. That is the one possession no one can ever take from them. If the story of Marin and Raffaele touched your heart, please leave a like so I know you're still listening. Share this story with someone you think may need to hear it tonight, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that every day, more meaningful stories can find their way to you. How did you feel about the story you just heard, and what part of it stayed with you the most? Please leave a comment below, because we sincerely want to hear the feelings that come from deep within your heart. We wish you and your family lasting good health, a joyful life, peace, and serenity every day. Thank you for listening. Goodbye, and we'll see you again in the next video.